I never would have anticipated my life disintegrating so fast. I'm Jake, 18 years old, and I find myself in a difficult position with my stepmother, Holly. She is 42, and her meddling with my life has gotten to be intolerable. Allow me to set some background starting from the beginning. When I was 10 years old, my parents split. It was messy, and for a long period I felt lost. Holly was remarried by my dad, 48 now when I was 14, with 2 children from a past marriage, Ben, now 17, and Lily, now 14. Holly entered our lives. Though the change was difficult, initially I believed it would be great to have a larger family. I always felt like an outsider, even though Holly pushes us constantly to feel like one large, joyful family. Though I have always been a decent student. For the last 3 years, I volunteered at the nearby animal shelter, kept a 3.8 GPA all through high school, and competed in robotics contests. My ideal is to study engineering at a top-notch university. At least until lately, my dad has always encouraged me toward my academic ambitions. My dad sat me down for what I thought would be a decent chat a few months ago when I was applying to universities. He mentioned college money he had been building for me from birth. I was surprised. At most of the colleges I intended to visit, it would have covered living expenses and tuition. Everything I had been striving toward seemed at last within grasp. We debated colleges, campus tours, and various programs for hours. In a long time, that was the finest chat I had with my dad. But when Holly learned about the money, things rapidly began to slide bad. It began gradually. One morning when Dad was at work, Holly rounded me in the kitchen. Though her voice was laid back, I sensed conflict. "You know, I worked through college at your age," she replied. "Loans, part-time employment." I attempted to dismiss it, telling Mom I intended to work part-time while school too, so learning the value of money seemed pointless. Then she responded, "Yeah, but you won't really need to, will you? Not with all that money passed to you." I then understood Holly was unhappy with my college finances. Her observations became more frequent and pointed from then on. She would bring up tales about folks who worked 3 jobs to pay for school, or about some cousin who paid off student loans in record time at every dinner. She would constantly treat me like she felt I was lazy for taking my dad's assistance. Not understanding how much it hurt, Dad would nod along. Still worse, Holly began to sow notions in Dad's brain. One night I listened in their chamber. Holly remarked something like, "Aren't you worried about handing him all that money? He may become lethargic as a result." To my dismay, Dad agreed with her. Perhaps we should cut the fund or pay for tuition just. Dad began to waver after that. He started remarking about perhaps only funding my education, but not living expenses. He seemed to have totally forgotten all our conversations and the assurances he had given concerning my future. I tried bringing it up with my mother, but Dad and her hardly interact any longer. When I explained what was happening and urged her to speak out for me, she became enraged. Simple for her to say, she doesn't have to live with Holly. Last week, things got out of hand when I heard Holly chatting in the kitchen with her son, Ben. Her words, "Don't worry about college, honey," caught me as I was headed to my room. "I'm attempting to get some of Jake's education fund sent toward your future. Given you and Lily won't, it is unfair that he gets such large money." What I was hearing defied belief. Actually, Holly was trying to hand my education fund to her own children. Absolutely enraged, I rushed into the kitchen. Holly's eyes got bigger. "Were you listening in front of others?" She tried to deflect by asking. I fired back, not caring about that. "You mean you're handling my college fund? Dad had saved the money for me from birth." Holly's countenance altered. Coldly crossing her arms, she remarked, "I'm just trying to make sure all the kids are treated fairly. You shouldn't be getting such big money when Ben and Lily won't be here. It still astounds me. But you have no money to distribute," I yelled. "Dad saved that for me long before you were even on the scene." She became defensive, saying I was being selfish and had not even thought about the futures of my step-siblings. I thought I may go insane. Wanting to spend the money my dad saved for my schooling seemed greedy. It left me flabbergasted when Holly even dared to advise me to learn the value of money by suggesting I should look at community college. Looking at Ben in search of some encouragement, he simply gazed down on the floor. At last I remarked, "This is ridiculous. I will bring this up with Dad." Holly simply grinned and said, "Go ahead, but keep in mind that your father and I are partners. Together, we decide what to do. I attempted to get Dad alone that evening, but Holly was continually hanging about, guiding the discussion. Though I was enraged, I also felt as though I was slipping back. Every supper turned into torture as Holly made remarks about money, responsibility, and how freebies make people weak. And Dad? He would simply nod along as though he had no memory of all the strategies we devised. I became rather lonely. Clearly uneasy, Ben and Lily avoided me. They wouldn't have gone against their mother either. I drowned myself in college applications, trying to get scholarships should my worst fears materialize. One evening at last, I caught Dad alone himself in his study. I shared with him what Holly had been saying regarding money. Though his countenance was difficult to read, Jake sighed and remarked, "Your stepmother has a point. Perhaps we offered you the whole sum too quickly." The floor seemed to be sinking under me. "But Dad, you promised." "I have worked rather hard for this. I have maintained my grades and performed as asked." Looking embarrassed, he added, "I know, and we're proud of you." Nevertheless, Holly believes. I shut him off. "Since when should Holly make decisions about my future? She was not even present when you started saving for me." Dad's face became firm. "Right now, Jake, she is my wife. Her views count." Holly stepped in and inquired whether everything was well before I could answer. Clearly uneasy, Dad insisted everything was good. Holly gently suggested that we investigate more affordable schools. I came away from the chat feeling deceived and demoralized. My aspirations of enrolling at a prominent institution were fading, and I had no idea what to do going forward. Things only grew worse following that terrible talk with my dad. Every day, Holly appeared to be guiding him more powerfully. She persisted in pushing her agenda, talking about financial responsibility, and every time I brought up my college ambitions, she managed to veer the discussion into another one. It seemed as though I no longer really existed. Since marriage to my dad, Holly had never worked outside the house. She was always preaching the value of financial freedom, yet she was totally reliant on my dad's salary. She became rather hostile when I pointed it out during a heated argument, claiming that staying at home with children was the most vital profession on earth. Given she had just informed me I had to learn responsibility by paying for my own education, it seemed ironic. My dad appeared torn when I attempted to explain to him how unjust it was that Holly wanted to allocate my education fund to her children. Though he was too terrified of confrontation, I knew he was not ignorant of what was happening. He had always been the type of person who would far sooner avoid fighting than defend himself or anybody else. I was viewing it once more after seeing it when he was married to my mother. It was part of the reason their marriage had disintegrated. Deep down, I knew he was terrified of confronting Holly because he didn't want to lose another relationship. I felt totally outnumbered not so long ago. Ben and Lily, her children, started avoiding me even more after Holly persuaded Dad that I was acting irrational for wanting to utilize the college fund. Holly had concocted some tales to them regarding my selfishness, but they never questioned her. She was their mother, after all, and I was only the stepbrother who had never really fit in. Though I thought about getting in touch with my dad's parents about the matter, I hesitated. My grandparents' Holly was never really popular, hence I worried that involving them would only lead to more turmoil. What if it deteriorated things even further between Dad and me? I wanted not to create an even more widening distance between us. I was also yearning for someone to relate what I was going through at the same time. Holly persisted in calling me selfish, and it was beginning to get to me. She would distort my words and gaslight me every time I tried to explain my side of things, therefore losing me control over reality. She would say one thing to us alone and then utterly deny it when Dad was there. It was really irritating. I began to doubt my own memories. Was I truly acting selfish? Was I indeed the one in error here? I attempted to find middle ground. To help with some of the costs, I proposed working part-time while in college. Though Holly rejected the proposal right away, claiming it wasn't responsible enough, I thought maybe it would help her relax. She said it didn't make logic and I wasn't learning the right lessons unless I was struggling and worried about money. Though I was trying to be conscious, nothing I did satisfied her. Time passed and I began to feel increasingly alone. Unable to manage the stress, I skipped family gatherings. While my dad sat there nodding like a puppet, every meal became a lesson from Holly on the value of diligence and earning everything yourself. I could hardly eat, so annoyed was I. Mostly Ben and Lily remained out of it, but their quiet made me feel even more alone. They did not defend me, but I could not really hold them responsible either. I knew Holly was spreading falsehoods about me, and they were just as mired in this poisonous atmosphere as I was. She handled them differently than she did me. She never chastised them about financial responsibility or questioned their expenditure patterns. She was clearly seeing me as a threat, and I had no idea why. After weeks of continuous stupidity, one evening I at last broke down. My ideal university, a top engineering program I had been striving toward for years, had just sent an admission letter. I sensed some optimism for the first time in a long run. Ignoring momentarily about all the stress, I hurried downstairs to inform Dad. When I gave Dad the news, he was in the kitchen with Holly. His face was bright with pride, and for a single second it seemed as though everything might be okay. Then Holly cleared her throat, suddenly shifting the tone. She got back going, grumbling about financial obligations and how I ought to have come to appreciate diligence. I could no longer stand it. Months of building up all the rage, resentment, and hurt that had been inside me suddenly erupted. Telling Holly she had no right to meddle in my future or my schooling, I faced her. She was accused of trying to take away what my dad had been saving for me long before she was ever in the picture. The debate got hot very fast. Holly started yelling, hot in her face from rage, accusing me of being selfish and unappreciative. She stated I had always viewed her and her children like outsiders and had never embraced her as part of the family. Dad tried to get in between, but neither of us paid attention. Under the heat of the occasion, I spoke out of turn. Holly, a gold digger just interested in my dad's money, answered my phone. She tried to pilfer my education fund for her own children, and I charged. She had never worked a day since marrying my dad, despite her continuous lectures on financial independence, as I even pointed out. Holly gasped at that. She went to my dad and stated crying that she could not live like this anymore. She claimed to have felt dangerous in her own house and that I had been antagonistic to her for years. Then she delivered the bombshell that turned everything around. Holly said I was approaching her inappropriately. I froze into silence. I couldn't even create words to defend myself since the charge was so ridiculous and so totally manufactured. Expecting Dad to see through the apparent lie, I glanced at him, but the instant I saw his face, I knew. He accepted her. His eyes teemed with disappointment and contempt. He instructed me to get to my room while Holly and he worked over what to do. Unbelievable what was occurring, I paced for hours. How could someone meant to know me better than anyone, my dad, believe such a horrible falsehood? Dad visited my room late nights. His face was dark, and while he spoke, he avoided looking me in the eye. He said he cannot have someone living under his home acting inappropriately. He advised me I had till the end of the week to settle somewhere. He wouldn't listen when I attempted to once again present my case and show him the reason. He continued saying he never believed I could do anything like this, and he was let down in me. He sent an envelope containing some cash to get me started. Still not sure what was occurring, I dazedly packed my stuff. Ben and Lily ignored me, clearly informed by Holly of some distorted view of events. Holly was always there, acting as the victim, even though I tried one more time to show Dad the reality. Everything seemed to blur until Dad issued the ultimatum to leave. Feeling as though I was living in some kind of dream from which I couldn't wake, I packed my things. Though I knew there was no logic with Dad as long as Holly was there controlling him, it still stung to watch him accept such a nasty lie about me. Just barely holding back my emotions, I contacted my mother and described the circumstances. She was enraged and wanted to visit Dad and Holly right away to face him. I pleaded with her, though, not to. Should she create a scene, I worried it would just make matters worse. Still, part of me hoped Dad would come to his senses on his own. Bringing my mother into the matter, I wanted to avoid aggravating things. Fortunately, Chris, my friend, came through really extensively for me. He readily volunteered to let me remain in his guest room when I told him what had transpired. I wouldn't be invading anybody as his parents were away from town for a few months. Having few other choices, I packed the remainder of my belongings and headed out of my childhood house. Living with Chris first seemed unusual. Though it was not the same as having my own room, he was rather helpful. Cooking meals and doing housework helped me try to give where I could, but I couldn't get rid of the guilt of being a burden. I was on edge all the time, going back over every exchange I had with Holly in my mind. How had things fallen so far from under control? The allegations Holly had leveled kept me from sleeping. They were so ridiculous and nasty, and I couldn't understand why she would go such distances to sour my relationship with Dad. We did not get along, maybe, but to accuse me of anything so horrible? She seemed to have been waiting for the perfect opportunity to totally pull me out of the picture, and I was beginning to think this was her intended course all along. The worst aspect was that Dad had accepted her without second thought. Not even had he let me defend myself. Because of Holly's manipulative falsehoods, he had thrown away all we had created, all the trust, the love, the memories, all of which had been... That insight came to me more forcefully than anything else. It transcended the college fund now. It related to my connection with my father, and it felt as though it had been irreversibly broken. I began to weigh my alternatives. Though I considered contacting my grandparents, Dad's parents, I was afraid of their response. What if they thought Holly's falsehoods also reflected reality? Suppose they looked at me with the same contempt and disdain Dad had. The idea of losing them too horrified me. And supposing Holly had already poisoned them against me, following her pattern with Dad. It seemed like I was walking a tightrope without a safety net, whatever I did. I also thought about reporting Holly's bogus charges to the police, but I had no idea what good it could do. She hadn't officially made the accusations or pressed charges. Hence, I had no idea what the government could do. And I worried that involving the cops would only cause Dad to become even more convinced that I was the cause of problems. I hardly needed him to feel even more justified in throwing me out. Although she resided in another state, my mother had volunteered to let me live with her. Moving in with her would mean resigning from all I had worked for. My college ambitions, my life, and my future. Though it was becoming obvious I might not have any other option, I did not want to give up on my ambition of enrolling in the engineering program I had battled so hard to get into. The days went by, and I grew increasingly demoralized. My college money was still in flux, so without it I could not afford to pay for attendance at my ideal university. I began researching loans and scholarships, but the figures didn't line up. The idea of compromising for a less expensive choice or postponing college completely was devastating. Having fought so hard to reach this position, one person's falsehood suddenly seemed to be causing everything to slide away. The emotional toll was too much. On some days, I couldn't even get out of bed. The weight of the circumstances smushed me and made it seem as though there was no way out. Throwing myself into my part-time work at the grocery store helped me try to divert myself, but it was hardly enough for what I needed for school. Every time I attempted to think rationally about my circumstances, I was overcome with a surge of despair and rage that prevented concentration. Chris was amazing all through everything. When I wanted to rant, he allowed me and gave me space when I didn't want to chat. But I could sense he was also under stress from the circumstances. He didn't state it straightforwardly, but I knew he was apprehensive about my stay at his house. Though they were understanding, I couldn't force on his parents indefinitely. They were returning in a few weeks. Though I knew I had to decide quickly, doubt and anxiety froze me. Should I abandon my ideal university and go in with my mother? Should I attempt to make Dad realize the truth and one final time confront him? Should I include my grandparents and run the danger of aggravating even more family conflict? Then, almost out of nowhere, my grandparents called. I nearly ignored it at first. Fearful that it may be Dad or Holly attempting to reach me, I had been dodging calls from unidentified numbers. But I'm pleased I picked up something someone told me to. I knew something was amiss as soon as I heard my grandmother speak. She asked whether I was safe and whether all was well, sounding concerned. Until she said Dad had phoned them and informed them some disturbing news about why I had left home, I had no idea what was happening. My heart fell. Her answer to my question about what precisely Dad had told them reinforced my worst suspicions. Dad had told them about Holly's unfounded charges, casting me as some sort of predator who had been approaching her inappropriately. I became queasy in my gut. Dad thought these falsehoods, which was terrible enough. Now, my grandparents? The idea of people staring at me the way Dad had, disgusted and disappointed, tormented me. But then something quite unusual occurred. Unlike Dad, my grandma said, they did not quite accept Holly's account. They were dubious. They watched me grow up. They knew me, and something about the whole affair didn't set right with them. They were thus phoning to hear my side of the story rather than to criticize me. I had a fleeting hope for the first time in weeks. I inhaled deeply, then told them everything. Beginning from the outset, I discussed the college money, Holly's growing attempts at intervention, and how she had coerced Dad into turning against me. I informed them about overhearing her intentions to funnel the money to her own children and about how the last argument had resulted in her fabricating those horrible charges upon realizing she was losing control of the circumstances. They listened silently while I opened my heart, and there was a lengthy pause on the other end of the line as I closed. At last, my granddad spoke. Angry and forceful, his voice assured me they believed me. They were surprised Dad had sided with her so immediately, since they knew I would never engage in the behaviors Holly had accused me of. Then my grandma spoke, and I frozen. They would be speaking with Dad. Though my grandparents insisted, I fretted, thinking that facing Dad would only make matters worse. They watched Dad toss his connection with me over a lie, unable to stand by. After they had spoken with him, they promised to call me back. The following several hours hurt like hell. Terrified of what may happen, I couldn't concentrate on anything while I waited. If Dad ignored them, what then? What would happen if this only infuriated him? Even worse, supposing my grandparents had second thoughts after speaking with him and concluded, perhaps Holly was speaking the truth after all? My heart was pounding as my phone at last rang once again. I paused briefly before responding when my phone rang. My hands shook and my heart was hammering. On the other side of the telephone, my grandfather's voice was somber, and I realized right away that the chat with Dad hadn't gone as planned. "We spoke with your father," he said, his voice low and frustrated. "It was difficult. From the beginning, he was defensive, trying to defend Holly's behavior and charging us with not seeing the circumstances." My gut dropped as I listened, terrified. My grandpa clarified that although Dad had initially sought to minimize Holly's claims, she had felt uncomfortable with me, and her response, albeit strong, was based on real worries. But my grandparents were not feeling it. They asked how he could believe such horrible lies about his own son without even thinking about my side of the story. They pressed him firmly. The talk apparently became hot very fast. For the first time in years, my grandfather told Dad straightforwardly that he was being controlled by Holly. He had never spoken up before. Dad was warned by him that he was seriously making a mistake that might permanently sour our relationship. Then my grandfather delivered a bombshell not at all expected. "We told him that if he didn't fix this, if he didn't at least hear you out and get to the truth, we'd change our will," my grandfather said, his tone calm but firm. "Everything that would have gone to him, the inheritance, the family assets, it will find you instead." I gasped. Before, I never really considered the inheritance left by my grandparents. Though it had never crossed my mind as something that would impact me, hearing them use it as leverage against my father was intolerable. Their willingness to travel that distance to get him to see reason astounded me. Then my grandmother joined in, her voice softer but no less firm. "We love you and know who you are. We won't let Holly's lies separate this family without a counteraction. We are behind you 100% and ready to go to great lengths." I experienced a tsunami of feelings, relief, thankfulness, and fear all at once. Having their help made me very happy, but I also worried about what this might mean for my relationship with Dad. Would he see me as turning his parents against him? Would this cause our distance to widen even more? Though it felt like things were spiraling out of control, I did not want to lose my father. My grandfather's voice darkened once more when I asked how Dad had responded to their ultimatum. "He didn't enjoy it. He charged us with taking sides without knowing the whole truth and blackmailing him. He hung out on us at the end of the call. It seemed now like I was really in a waiting game." Dad had been given a week by my grandparents to get in touch with me, at least try to hear my side of the story. Should he fail, they assured them they would honor their threat on the inheritance. Part of me hoped this would be the wake-up call Dad needed, that it would cause him to doubt Holly's account and recall who I truly was. Another side of me, though, was afraid it would only drive him farther away, and that he would view me as turning against him to control him. While I knew I couldn't live there permanently, my situation with Chris was still good in the interim. Although his parents might have been sympathetic to my circumstances, I wanted to avoid dragging them down for any more than required as they were returning soon. Although my grandparents offered to let me live with them, they lived in another state, and moving there would mean forfeiting my dreams of attending my ideal college. Every alternative seemed to be drawing in on me. The next week pulled on agonizingly slowly. Trying to save as much as I could, I headed to work at the grocery store, but it was not nearly enough for college. Every day I felt as though the circumstances were smothering me. The fear of how that confrontation might go paralyzed me, even though I wanted to challenge Dad and help him see the truth. Then a few days later, my phone rang once more. Dad was in charge this time. His voice seemed different, shaken, unstable. "Is it possible for us to meet? I have to talk to you," he said. I agreed, wary but hoping he had at last begun to recognize Holly's falsehoods. We met in a neighborhood coffee shop, and I hardly knew him when I saw him. In just a few weeks, he seemed to have aged years. Dark lines encircled his eyes, and he slumped defeatedly as someone else carrying a great weight. He broke entirely as soon as we sat down. He started crying, repeating apologies, pleading for my pardon again and again. "I'm so sorry," he continued repeating, his voice shaking. "I ought to have paid you some attention. I was unaware, I didn't realize." He told what had transpired through his tears. He had discovered the truth about Holly's lies. Apparently, he had overheard her on the phone with her ex-husband, Emma, and Jack's father, making plans for the future. At first, he didn't receive the complete image, but it was enough to make him suspect. He began observing Holly's conduct more closely and noted contradictions in her behaviors and tales. The last blow came when he discovered Holly and her ex in a compromising posture early one day when he returned home unexpectedly. She first tried to gaslight him when he questioned her, arguing he was dreaming, but Dad no longer purchased it. He insisted on the truth, and finally Holly came clean. She came clean about having been having months of an affair with her ex. She was also pregnant. Hence, the chronology made it quite evident that the kid wasn't Dad's. She said that she had been dissatisfied in the marriage for some time, believing she had hurried into it without really moving on from her ex-husband. She had decided to control the circumstances to suit her rather than facing those emotions squarely. Holly said she felt her personal financial stability threatened by seeing my education money. She didn't have direct access to it, but she had been gently urging Dad to spend that money on trips or house repairs. Her first objective was to undermine the fund and protect her own financial situation. Her strategy to keep Dad and me apart included the charges against me, therefore assuring that I would not meddle with her scheme. I was enraged and relieved at the same time when Dad told me all this. At last, the truth was on show. He knew I was innocent. Holly's web of falsehoods had at last come apart. That it had taken something this extreme for him to see the truth infuriated me, though. How could he have permitted things to get thus far? How could he have undermined me, his own son? Dad asked me for pardon, confessing he realized he didn't deserve it, but hoping one day I would once again trust him. He said he was divorcing right away and would do all in his power to put things right. The divorce cases were disorganized. Realizing her scheme fell apart, Holly sought as much as she could before it was decided upon. She asserted she was entitled to half of everything, Dad's pension, the home, even more. But the judge was not receptive to her assertions, given the proof of her affair and manipulation. Though it would be a long, demanding procedure, Dad seemed to emerge from it better than anticipated. For me, the emotional toll was not something I could rapidly recover from. Understanding the harm the whole experience had caused, Dad had volunteered to pay for treatment. Though I had returned home, things seemed different. Uncertain of how to mend the broken relationship, both of us were strolling on eggshells around each other. Soon we were scheduled to begin family therapy in hopes it would help us negotiate the distrust and suffering each of us was experiencing. Fortunately, my college schedule was back on target. Dad had pledged to do whatever it needed to get me into my ideal university and replace every dollar Holly had tried to siphon from. Emotionally and financially, my grandparents have been quite helpful. They have been on hand whenever I needed it. After months of gasping under Holly's falsehoods, it seemed like I was at last breathing. Conversely, Holly kept trying to control others even as her surroundings fell apart. She contacted family friends, attempting to construct a tale of a misunderstood wife who made a mistake and deserved a second chance. She even dared to call me, sobbing and asserting that she was terrified and perplexed and that she never meant for things to get this far. Right through that, I could see the deception was obvious day, but the extent she had gone to sickened me even yet. Sitting down to consider all that had transpired, I realized how rapidly one person's falsehoods may ruin several lives. Holly had left the rest of us to gather the fragments without thinking twice. She had walked away from the disaster she produced. Like I have no idea what the future holds for my family or myself, for the first time in months, I felt as though I could at last advance. The truth was out, my name was cleared. Although my relationship with Dad was still delicate, I hoped we may mend it gradually. Right now, I am concentrating on recovery, and thank you to everyone who supported me by following my tale. When I most needed it, your advice and compassion were like lifelines. I'll keep on going forward and make sure I never allow someone like Holly to get me down once again wherever Story 2. My parents declined to assist me with college. They now depend on me to provide the financing. All right, nothing happens now. Thus, Kevin is my name. I am a 32-year-old mechanic by trade. Although it's not a glamorous profession, it helps me pay the bills, and I do love it. It's entertaining to watch things get mended, and I like the satisfaction of finding a solution. I also don't have to answer to some stupid boss now that I own my own tiny garage. That's not the point of this, though. The point is that my sister Amy plays a major role in the disaster that is my family. Allow me to briefly explain the backdrop. My family wasn't impoverished when I was a child, but we also weren't wealthy. My dad, Rick, drives a truck, and my mother, Janice, used to work at a nearby diner. Not very glamorous. They put in a lot of labor, but they never had a lot of spare money, because my parents were realistic. I'm still in complete shock at what transpired with Amy. Amy is therefore 3 years younger than me. She's the kid of gold. Always, you know, the kind who was given everything to her with gusto. She never worked for anything in her life. Yet I was supposed to solve problems on my own. It seemed as though she could do no wrong as a child. My parents would do whatever it took to give her what she wanted. But I had to strive for whatever I desired or I would never obtain it. To be honest, I've always harbored some resentment towards it. How, after all, was I not there? I was doing odd jobs, mowing lawns, kicking my ass, and doing all I could to save money for stuff. Amy was given money to go shopping with her pals or do other things at this time. My folks behaved as though it were nothing. But I promise you, it irritated me. All right, let's go back a little to when I was around 27. I had at last saved enough cash for my own home, just a modest fixer-upper with 2 bedrooms on the outskirts of town, nothing special. It was mine, you know, even though it wasn't in the greatest area. It took me months to tidy up. Painting new flooring, remodeling the kitchen, all of it. I felt pleased with it. That was, after all, the first time in my life that I truly felt like I had achieved anything significant on my own. So that year, I took it upon myself to host Thanksgiving. I reasoned that it would be a wonderful way to reward my family for my diligence. I thus invited my parents and Amy, even though I knew it would be difficult. By then, she had been seeing this real estate guy, John, for approximately a year. This man had a lot going on, or at least that was Amy's constant boast. Beautiful clothing, a fancy automobile, and a downtown apartment full of luxury. Whatever, his money was not important to me. Well done, I suppose. However, I was not prepared for Amy and John's behavior on Thanksgiving. When the time arrives, I've been cooking non-stop, making sure everything is correct and cleaning the house. When my parents arrive, everything goes as planned. We are engaging in casual conversation, catching up, and enjoying appetizers. Then John and Amy show up. Now, to begin with, Amy enters the room with the mindset that she is superior to everyone else. She looks at everything as she strolls about the home, as if she is scrutinizing everything. I felt my blood begin to boil even though I was trying to let it go. She begins to remark on several things, such as how little the house is, how outdated the decor is, and how unsafe the area is. But she doesn't stop there. She keeps talking about how big John's condo is, how it has floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the city, and this amazing security system. I didn't say anything, but I was fuming on the inside. I mean, really, who spends the whole Thanksgiving holiday critiquing other people's homes? Of course, my folks said nothing. They probably simply sat there and thought, "Oh, that's just Amy." I could feel my patience ebbing away, but I was attempting to be the stronger person, Dot. She went too far, and I didn't want to start a commotion. She begins by discussing how John covers every expense. She would never have to live in a place like mine, and how fortunate she is to be with him. As in, slapping it in my face. At that point, I snapped. "At least I paid cash for this place," I said her as I shot her glance. "I put effort on it. Nothing needed to be paid for by our parents, and I most definitely didn't need to rely on someone else's income to make ends meet. Are you able to say the same?" Amy flushed, and I knew I had gotten under someone's skin. John, who had been largely silent until then, sent me an irritated glance, but remained silent. Dot. My folks appeared to be at a loss for what to do as they awkwardly sat there. I was no longer concerned. I was furious. I then ordered her to show herself the door if she felt she was too nice for my house. This place is empty of people. That concluded everything. Without more words, she and John stormed out. Afterward, my parents made an effort to console me by stating things like, "You know how she is," and "She didn't mean it." But I would not have it. I was done. I informed them that just because she's family didn't mean I would put up with her nonsense any longer. I didn't speak to Amy again after that. Since then, I haven't seen her, and to be honest, I'm okay with it. Without her in it, my life has been a lot less hectic. However, my parents have never given up on attempting to reconcile with us. They will sometimes bring her up, mentioning things like family's family. Alternatively, you two ought to let the past go. However, I'm not drawn in. Amy has always been an entitled, pampered child. Furthermore, nothing has altered. That's how it all happened then. I eventually stood up to my sister, and now we haven't spoken in 5 years. Furthermore, I don't miss her. She was a constant cause of anxiety. I also enjoy my life more without her turmoil. All right, so 5 years have passed since the entire Thanksgiving catastrophe. Between Amy and I, things have been rather calm. Sincerely, I assumed everything would remain as it was, and I was quite content with that. Not a single drama or tension. Naturally, though, nothing remains easy for very long. When families are engaged. My mother gave me a surprise call a few weeks ago. It was not out of the ordinary that I hadn't heard from her in a short while. Though we didn't communicate daily or anything, we had been getting along rather well since the entire Amy incident happened. Upon receiving her call, she adds, "Kevin, we need to talk." It's never good when someone says that, is it? My thoughts begin to race, wondering if there was some sort of health issue with Dad. But that's not it at all. She surprises me with this surprise instead. Amy is getting married to John. The same person she dated 5 years prior. The person she was with when she had that nightmare on Thanksgiving. To be honest, I didn't have the best initial response. I groaned a little and responded, "Oh, okay." Considering that, really, what else could I say? Not that I'm interested in Amy's current romantic situation, but I assumed the discussion would end there. Nope. Mom begins gushing about how important Amy's wedding is and how elegant it will be. She is discussing locations, flowers, and everything in between. Naturally, she's thrilled. Amy's parents have always had far greater involvement in her life than in mine. It's simply the nature of the beast. However, she says something that causes me to hesitate. Mom responds, "We've promised Amy that we'll pay for the venue and decorations, but we're going to require some assistance, Kevin." At that, I had to look twice. Hold on. What? Do you require assistance? With what? I questioned, a bit perplexed. She continues as though this is a common request. "We need you to assist us afford the expenditures." I will not be dishonest. It completely stunned me. At first, I wasn't even sure what to say. My parents requested money from me to help with Amy's wedding. I haven't spoken to that Amy in 5 years. The same Amy who spent the bulk of our childhoods ruining my life. The same Amy who left my house that Thanksgiving without ever apologizing. I had the impression that I was living in an other reality where none of that was significant. Come on, I mean. They actually expected me to contribute to her wedding expenses. Breathing deeply, I tried not to panic. Why in the world would you think I would want to do that, Mom? I asked, trying not to get too stirred up, but maintaining a steady tone. Mom appeared truly taken aback. It's your sister, Kevin. Family supports. Kin. At that point, I lost it. I expressed to her my precise thoughts. Family supports. Kin. Really? When I needed assistance paying for trade school, where had that enthusiasm gone? You guys did not do anything at all in the past. But now you're asking me to give you money so Amy can get married. I seldom talked to the same Amy. Mother became quite silent after that, most likely because she was at a loss for words. But I didn't stop there. I told her about all the times I was left on my own, and Amy always got what she wanted. How they led her to trample me for years. And now, as if none of it had ever occurred, they are requesting money from me. Mom eventually responded, "It's different, Kevin," after a minute. Back then, we lacked the necessary funds. Not because it was humorous, but just because of how absurd it sounded, I laughed. Do you really believe I have enough money to attend Amy's wedding right now? Are you able to hear yourself at all? You won't get paid a cent for this. You shouldn't have made the pledge if you can't afford it. After that, Mom became combative, claiming they didn't want Amy to think they couldn't help her, particularly in front of John's affluent relatives. They seem to have been making an effort to stay up with his wealthy parents, who are constantly throwing money at the wedding. In order to avoid seeming as though they were lagging behind, my parents wanted to participate. Everything was so flimsy. Really, does it really matter whether John's family is wealthier? Amy's entitlement and spoilt nature remains unabated. However, my parents were so invested in maintaining this image that they were prepared to ask me for money in order to maintain appearances. I told my mother that I didn't even care about the wedding, that I wasn't going to help, and that it wasn't my job. She attempted to put me under pressure by telling me that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and that helping the family would mean a lot, but I refused to give up. I informed her up front that she was going to have to solve this on her own. She seemed dissatisfied, but I wasn't going to back down. She told me she would talk to her father and come up with a different plan as we finished the phone on a very uncomfortable tone. I was just exhausted from the entire event. After all these years, I couldn't believe they still had the audacity to ask me for money, especially of all people for Amy. It just resurfaced every grudge I had believed I had laid to rest following that Thanksgiving altercation. The way my parents have always gone above and beyond for Amy, but I've been forced to solve problems on my own. Nothing seems to have changed. I made an effort to put it behind me during the following several days, but it persisted to bother me. I wondered, in part, if I had overreacted. I mean, it was my parents requesting assistance, and even though they irritate me, I've always tried to treat them fairly. However, this felt unlike the others. They seemed to be going too far. A week later, I was still thinking about the whole situation when my dad called. My dad seldom calls unless it's an urgent matter, so I answered straight immediately. He was direct and to the point. "According to your mother, you won't assist with Amy's wedding." "No," he replied. "Hi there, avoid small conversation, just dive right in." Yes, it is correct." I spoke as my gut began to tighten. This was going to be a difficult talk, I could tell already. Father sighed deeply. "Kevin, please help us out, we truly need it." We quote "re-trapped" because we already agreed to pay for a portion of it. It will appear unprofessional if we fail to follow through. Once more, there it was, this fixation with appearances. Amy wasn't even in the picture anymore. Keeping a straight face in front of John's family was the goal. I sensed my rage rising once more. Trying not to freak out, I said, "Look, Dad, the pledges you made are not mine to keep. You shouldn't have promised to pay if you couldn't afford to. I won't come to your aid." Dad took offense at it. He began to talk about how families should support one another and how they have always tried to do what is best for them. However, as he spoke more, I became aware of something. They didn't seek for my assistance because they were in need of it. They anticipated that, which is why they were asking, as though I had an obligation to tidy up their mess. Thus, I interrupted him. "Sorry, but I'm not going to do that, Dad. You'll need to come up with another plan." That concluded everything. Similar to the chat with my mother, it ended poorly. I wasn't feeling bad for once, even if they weren't pleased with me. I had tried to maintain harmony my entire life. I wasn't going to let them push me around, though, this time. Okay, so I figured things would calm down after speaking with my dad. I assumed they would just leave it alone because I had made my position quite clear. Really, what more could they have done? Correct? Naturally, though, that isn't how my family operates. It never is. I received this communication from my cousin Mark a few days later. Mark is now one of the few relatives with whom I get along. We've always gotten along well, and he's not into the drama thing. That's why when he messages me, "Hey, can we talk?" I assumed it was something informal, like we were just catching up or whatever. But it was evident when we spoke on the phone that this wasn't the case. Kev, dude, how are your parents doing? Without even trying to engage in the customary small conversation, he inquired. By what do you mean? I answered, feeling a knot in my gut start to grow. I sensed where this was going, but I wasn't going to draw any conclusions just yet. Mark gave a sigh. I spoke with your mother just now, and she seemed rather agitated. She mentioned that the entire family was talking about your refusal to assist with Amy's wedding. The thing I had been dreading was finally there. It wasn't what I expected, but my parents had already told the rest of the family about this, so I guess I shouldn't have been shocked. Particularly when their intention was to portray themselves as the victims. It was simply their way. Tell everyone everything you know about the tale, but omit any crucial information that may sway someone's opinion. I made an effort to remain composed as I gave Mark the rundown. Yes, they asked if I could help with the wedding expenses, but I declined. Why would I spend money on Amy's wedding when we hardly ever speak? It is not logical. Mark paid close attention, and once I was done, all he said was, "Man, I get it. I really do. But you are aware of your parents' character. They are giving the impression that you are the source of the issues. The entire family is now discussing it. This is getting a little messy." I realized at that point this was no longer just about me and my parents. Now that the whole family had been drawn into this, I was being portrayed as the villain. Though I felt my aggravation building, I refrained from venting my anger against Mark. It was not he who was stirring things up. He was only alerting me to something. Fantastic. I rubbed my temples and murmured, "Everyone now perceives me as a self-centered jerk." Mark took a moment to compose himself before responding. "Yes, that's right, sort of. Kev, it's not like everyone is aware of the entire tale. All they're hearing are the words of your parents, and you are aware of how easily they manipulate the truth." I gave a sour laugh. Yes, I am aware of their preferred method of spinning stories. After I hung up with Mark on the phone, I was furious. It's one thing to argue with your parents, but it's quite another to have them tell everyone in the family about it and then fabricate a tale to make you seem awful. That's a completely new low. I wasn't going to stand by and let them discredit me without correcting their misinformation. I thus took a step that I wasn't sure I would regret. I texted the family as a group. You know the sort of message that you really want to send, but hesitate to send because you're so frustrated. Yes, that caliber. I explained the scenario as plainly as I could, but it wasn't ridiculous. "Hello, I wanted to address a few points as I've heard a lot of discussion about them. Yes, my parents requested me to contribute to Amy's wedding expenses. I'm not helpful, sorry. It doesn't make sense for me to pay for something I'm not participating in, and I haven't spoken to Amy in years. Although I didn't initiate this turmoil, I won't let guilt scare me into doing something against my better judgment. Regards." It's brief and hopefully sufficient to prevent folks from drawing the wrong conclusion about me. I didn't anticipate an honest response from anyone. All I wanted to do was voice my opinion before rumors spread. Get worse. Naturally, though, things did not exactly go as I had hoped. My phone started exploding up within minutes. My granny called, my aunt texted, and even a cousin I hadn't spoken to in a long time sent me a note. The majority of them asked whether everything was well and offered their assistance in a kind manner, which was more like a covert form of curiosity. There were, however, some unpleasant ones as well. I received a lengthy text from my Uncle Gary, who has always been far too involved in the family company, telling me that family comes first and that me clinging on to past grievances was being petty. He continued talking about how Mom and Dad were only trying to do what was best for Amy and that I should pitch in to support the family. Even though it was annoying, I chose not to reply. Talking to someone like Gary would simply exacerbate the situation. My mother then phoned. It was evident in her voice. She was furious. What the devil is going on, Kevin? Why are you messaging every member of the family? Because you've been telling everyone that I'm not willing to assist and that I look horrible, Mom, just to clarify the air. Trying not to lose my cool, I said. I remained silent. It was untrue, she replied angrily. You're not willing to assist. And now, since they can't figure out why you're being so self-centered, everyone is angry, self-centered? Mom, you had to be kidding me. I am not going to pay for a wedding that I am not even attending. That isn't conceitful. That makes perfect sense, I fired back. Mom sighed into the receiver. Kevin, you're not understanding. Our goal is to ensure that Amy receives the wedding she is due. And now it seems like nobody believes we can cope. Mom, that's not my problem, It was you who gave her all of these promises. You ought not to have made those commitments if you are unable to pay for them. Keep me out of it. For an instant, I believed I had finally reached her since there was stillness on the other end of the call. Then she struck me with this, though. Kevin, you're abandoning your family, you quote, going to regret it eventually. I had no idea how to react to that. All I was feeling was fatigue. I'm over guilt trips, weary of the trickery. I'm sick of having to clear up everyone else's mess all the time. So I just apologized. Mom, you feel that way. And for the remainder of the evening, hung up. I simply sat there, gazing at my phone while the alerts continued to come in. I didn't want to argue with my family anymore, but I couldn't help but be upset at how everything had turned into a heated argument. All because I was unwilling to pay for a wedding in which I had no involvement. When I finally went to sleep, I had a realization, there was more to this whole thing than money. It had nothing to do with Amy, the wedding, or even my parents. Really? Control was at issue. My family had always looked on me to be the nice son who never upset the apple cart, to go along, to fall in line. And I didn't this time. Perhaps it explains why they were so enraged. It's not that I couldn't afford the wedding. Rather, it's only that I said no at last. I figured things would calm down after the whole incident with the family texts and my mom's phone call. I didn't really care if folks were still angry with me because I had made my point. I wasn't going to argue further about something that, in my opinion, should be rather easy. My sister's wedding was not being funded by me. Story ends here, however, like with many things involving my family, it wasn't over yet. A knock on my door occurs a few days after the last contact. Since I wasn't expecting anyone, I assumed it was either a delivery or something similar. However, I was really taken aback to see my dad standing there when I opened the door. Let me tell you something, though. My dad doesn't always appear in this manner, To be honest, I don't believe he has ever dropped by my house without giving me a call. So I realized immediately that something was wrong. He said, looking a little uncomfortable, Hey, Kev, is it possible for us to speak? I nodded and moved aside to let him enter, not sure what to say at first. Not that I wanted to get into another fight, but I didn't really have much of an option, Entering the living room, he kind of looked about as if for the first time, even though he had seen everything before. It was tight, as if neither of us knew how to bring up the subject. What is happening then? When I did inquire, I thought I would let him initiate the conversation. With a sigh, Dad took a seat on the couch. He responded, I just wanted to clear the air. It's gotten really out of control, and your mother is furious. Not knowing where this was headed, but prepared to defend myself if it devolved into another guilt trip, I sat down across from him. Yes, I did say I have observed. However, I'm not sure what action you would like me to take. I've already stated my position. Dad rubbed his hands together as if he was searching for the proper words to say. I know, he replied, However, everything around Amy's wedding has grown beyond what was necessary. Kev, we didn't think you would cover every expense. All we were looking for was a little assistance from you, as family, Once more, there it was. Relatives? When they want me to bend, they always use that magic phrase. I made an effort to remain composed, but I could feel my irritation rising once again. I quote, V already said no, Dad. I'm not against you or your mother. It's Amy's wedding, though. Amy, with whom I haven't communicated for 5 years. I'm not really involved in her life, so it doesn't make sense for me to help. Dad nodded, but it wasn't clear to me that he understood. I get that, Kev. But your mother, she's having a lot of trouble with this. Amy was promised our assistance, and it's getting messy now. We wish to avoid seeming to be lacking, particularly as John's parents cover all expenses. That's when I understood the true significance of this. It has nothing to do with supporting Amy or even the wedding. It has to do with appearances. The real issue wasn't as important to them as how they seemed in comparison to John's family. They did not want to appear incapable of managing the situation. Dad, I get it. I spoke, attempting to maintain a steady tone. That's on you guys, though. You assured her. I didn't. You made such pledges without consulting me first, and now that it's grown too pricey, you want me to help you out? Sorry, but I have nothing to do with that. Leaning back, Dad wiped his face with his palm. He seemed worn out, as though the entire thing was getting to him. You're accurate. He acknowledged that we had perhaps bitten off more than we could chew. However, we didn't want Amy to think that we weren't there for her. I exhale, attempting to remain calm, and I understand that. I genuinely do. However, Amy has always had your support. Compared to what you did for me, you have done more for her. And while I don't say it to seem resentful, it is the reality. Thus, when you approach me today, you're expecting me to assist with something that I have no involvement with. It seems off somehow. For a moment, Dad was silent, and it appeared like he was paying attention for the first time. He spoke carefully and replied, I guess we didn't see it that way. We simply reasoned that perhaps with your assistance, things between you and Amy could begin to improve. That meant things between Amy and me, and I nearly laughed, as though lavishing money on her wedding would somehow end the animosity and quiet that had lasted for 5 years. I told my dad that money couldn't make that better. There are problems between Amy and myself that go well beyond this wedding. You can't just use a check to put a Band-Aid on it. He let out another sigh, nodding as though he understood, but he was still not quite sure. He seemed deflated as he responded, I guess you're right. I simply don't know how to improve on any of this. It's getting difficult since your mom is so unhappy. That was my dad's peculiarity. Although he wasn't a nasty man, he was always trying to take care of everyone, even when it wasn't his duty. And in the process, he would put himself through unnecessary stress. With my elbows resting on my knees, I leaned forward. I don't mean to add stress to your lives, but I'm not going to cover Amy's wedding expenses. Dad. I quote, am not, simply said, I'm not responsible for it. Additionally, you two should quit acting like this. With a nod, he turned to face the ground. Okay, Kev, I understand. We'll work things out. It appeared as though for the first time in this whole debacle, he may be coming to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to give in and that I wasn't going to come to my senses and intervene with my wallet to rescue the day. Finally being able to hold my ground and have him at least recognize it felt nice, even though I knew it would be difficult to persuade my mother. Dad stayed for a little while later, during which time we discussed many topics, including life, work, and non-wedding related topics. We didn't get to talk like this very frequently, so it was good to simply have a casual discussion with him. But in the end, he had to go. He looked at me as if he wanted to say something more, but he didn't know how as he got up to leave. He patted me on the shoulder and said, Take care of yourself, Kev, before leaving. You too, Father, I answered, shutting the door behind him while seeing him descend the stairs. I experienced an odd combination of relief and annoyance. I was relieved that we had a conversation, but I knew that wasn't it. My mother was still enraged. Amy continued her marriage, and the conflict inside the family was not going to go away quickly. But I'd said enough, at least for now. To be honest, it felt pretty darn nice to know that I wasn't backing down. All right, so following that conversation with my dad, I briefly believed that things may finally calm down. At the very least, he was prepared to give it some space and appeared to understand where I was coming from. However, I ought to have known better in relation to my family. Nothing is ever that easy. After a few days, everything was very quiet. Not a single text or call, nothing. It was rather relieving at first. I figured at last they were going to back off and give me some room. The stillness seemed strange after that, though. You know that sensation when you have a sneaking suspicion about something but are unsure of what? Yes, it is true. Naturally, I was correct. One evening after work, I'm just unwinding at home when my phone buzzes. My Aunt Janet sent me a text message. Aunt Janet is one of those relatives that constantly wants to know about everything. Although she has never actually taken sides, she enjoys stirring things up and playing the role of the family's mediator. I knew this was going to be bad as soon as I saw her name appear. I've been hearing a lot about what's going on with the family, she wrote in her letter to Kevin. I believe it's time for us to speak. I sighed, wondering if I should even answer. Then, what the heck, I thought. I should give her a chance to speak. Perhaps she saw things from a viewpoint I hadn't thought about. Notice the spoiler. She didn't. It was obvious where this conversation was going from the outset when I phoned her. Kevin, sweetie, I would simply like to know why you are being so obstinate about getting married. With a voice full of that phony sweetness she often uses before laying on someone, she remarked. For the sake of the family, wouldn't you think you could provide a hand a little bit during your sister's wedding? That identical sentence, for the sake of the family, appeared once again. That was meant to be the secret phrase that enabled me to go for my wallet and erase all the unpleasant experiences I'd had. I tried not to become upset, even though I could feel my tolerance wearing thin, and I reminded Mom and Dad of what I'd previously explained. Amy and I don't have a romantic relationship. Janet, it's been 5 years since we last spoke. Since I'm not even involved in her life, I won't contribute to the cost of her wedding. With a sigh, Aunt Janet seemed to be speaking to a small child who was incapable of comprehending basic reasoning. Kevin, yet family is family. It's not necessary to be Amy's best friend in order to show her kindness. Marriages are very important. It's one of those occasions when everyone gathers. This might be your chance to get back in touch. That nearly made me chuckle. Re-establish contact after a 5-year absence. And I was meant to throw money at her wedding in order to do that. It sounded absurd. I apologize, but that is not going to occur. I spoke, maintaining a steady tone. Just because I contributed to Amy's wedding expenses doesn't mean that we would miraculously make things right. That is not how it operates. Furthermore, I won't act as though nothing is wrong between us when it is. For a little while, Janet remained silent, and I had the notion that she could be beginning to understand. I was struck by her thereafter. Kevin, you're acting really self-centered. That term, self-centered. Over the past few weeks, I'd heard it a lot, and it made my blood boil every time I heard it. It was self-serving to refuse to get drawn into a scenario that was unrelated to me. For defending my rights after years of being disregarded and unheard. In what ways am I being self-centered? My voice crisper now, I asked. For years, all I've done is strive to maintain harmony inside our family. I have not spoken. I haven't participated in the drama, and now it's me who is being selfish when I eventually say no to anything. Aunt Janet shook her head, obviously unimpressed by my brief digression. Kevin, you're missing the broader picture. There is more to this than simply Amy and you. The family is the focus. This breaks the hearts of your parents. All they want is for everyone to get together, and it's my responsibility to provide them with money in order to make it happen. I fired back. Janet, you know that's absurd. Come on. Once more, she sighed, but her tone was more irritated than pleasant. See, all I'm trying to do is assist. You seem to be exaggerating the situation, in my opinion. Okay, if you're dead set on this, just be aware that you're adding to everyone's difficulty. To that, I had no idea what to say at all. Here, there was no room for victory. I tried to explain myself several times, but it was never sufficient. To them, I was always the villain. The one who is the source of issues. I responded, All right, Janet, I'm tired of this whole talk. I appreciate the conversation. I ended the call before she could answer. I was too tired to do it anymore. I was feeling irritated as I sat there looking at my phone. I'm upset with my parents for including the entire family in this. I'm upset with my family for painting me as the bad guy. Quite frankly, I was a little pissed off with myself for even giving a damn about what they thought. I knew my refusal was the proper one, but I was beginning to feel the strain of it all. I tried to ignore the family drama as I headed to work the following day as normal, but I was mistaken in my assessment. Every time I looked at my phone, there was a new message from a family member. Uncles, cousins, and even some folks I hadn't spoken to in years all threw in their 2 cents on the matter. It was noon and I was tired. I decided to ignore everything else and concentrate just on the automobiles in front of me, at least in the garage, so I turned off my phone and stuffed it into my toolbox. Everything made sense, Dot. You make a repair. It functions. Easy. Not all of this tangle of emotions that comes with family. That evening, when I arrived home, I paused before picking up my phone again. A part of me didn't even want to handle the latest texts that had arrived. Naturally, though, my curiosity overcame me. One communication from relatives stuck out among the others. Amy S message. This was not what I had anticipated at all. It had been 5 years since we last spoke. Abruptly, a text message from her appeared directly on my screen. I was unsure about whether to open it or disregard it. A part of me suspected it was just another guilt trip, or worse, an outright demand for money from her. However, I chose to view the notice after gazing at it for a minute. She said, "Short too short? How long will this last? We hadn't exchanged words. Is it possible for us to speak?" It only mentioned that. No regrets, no justification, only those 3 terms. It was unclear to me what to make of it. I admit that I was curious. Conversely, I was cautious. After all this time, why now? Was she trying to reach out? Was the wedding the reason for it, since I had declined to pay? Or was it something different altogether? I sat there, trying to think of anything to say, my finger lingering over the keyboard while I stared at the screen. A part of me wanted to push it away, to stay out of whatever fresh drama this was going to create. However, there was a part of me that perhaps cared, even a tiny bit, and I wanted to give her a chance to speak. I typed a response after a lengthy silence. Yes. And that was all. The door that I had believed to have closed completely let a little squeak. I wasn't really sure what would happen next after sending Amy that brief text. I mean, we hadn't spoken to each other at all in the previous 5 years. She's suddenly in the mood to converse. It didn't feel right. There had to be more to it. But I had no idea what to anticipate. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be honest. After a few hours, I began to suspect that perhaps she would not really reply. Perhaps all she wanted was to appear as though she tried. Alternatively, perhaps she was awaiting my next move. In any case, I was content with the quiet. Of usual, though, my phone buzzed again right as I was starting to unwind and enjoy my evening. It was Amy. She had answered. "Can we get together? I'd like not conduct this over text." I spent some time gazing at the message. I'm not sure how to react to it. I was curious in part. Yes, while part of me had been waiting for an answer for years, the other half of me was still harboring resentment and fury. I wasn't sure whether I was ready to see her in person, especially not with the wedding planning still looming large. Ultimately, though, I reasoned that I would never truly find closure on this whole thing if I didn't meet her now, so I quickly replied back, "Okay, where and when would it be?" In the end, we decided to get together the next day at this tiny coffee shop downtown. Just a peaceful spot where we could have a conversation. Nothing too elaborate. The next day, I could feel the same old knot in my chest as I went in. It had been years since I'd seen Amy, and I had no idea what to expect from this talk. When I went in, she was already seated at a table and was glued to her phone. When I got close to her, she glanced up, and for a moment we simply uncomfortably gazed at each other. She had changed appearance. Not in a negative sense, just more mature, I suppose. Seeing her after all this time was strange. "Hey," she murmured. "Hello?" I took a seat across from her and answered. There was a lot of tension, as if none of us knew where to begin. She sighed after a protracted silence. "Look, I get why you're upset. I know our relationship hasn't been great. I think I deserve it. I was not expecting that. I had anticipated that she would ask for money up front and perhaps even get right into wedding talk. However, here she was, owning up to her mistake. I nodded, allowing her to continue since I had no idea what to say. I made a lot of mistakes. I understand that, and I'm not requesting that you forget anything. Rather, I was hoping to make some progress before it was too late." I reclined in my chair and gave her remarks some thought. There was a part of me that wanted to be doubtful, to think that she was merely stating this to get something from me. However, another part of me noticed how sincere she appeared. Perhaps, just perhaps, she genuinely wanted to put things right. I answered finally, "I don't know, Amy. Numerous things have occurred. All of it cannot be undone by a simple apology. Glancing down at her hands, she gave a nod. I must try, even though I know. I came to the realization that perhaps this wasn't about the wedding for the first time in a long time. Perhaps there was a deeper meaning to this.